It is good seeing you this morning. Appreciate your being here. And we're going to continue on with our study of the book of Ruth. We began our study last week, and we just basically introduced the book and gave some facts and some information, just various things. And then we looked into the basic family situation of the family of Elimelech, and that takes the first 6 verses, and we got started with that, and really got basically through letter A of this section as we talked about the Elimelech and his family lived with the loss of spiritual leadership, which put them in a position of having to, battle with the decision that under the judgment of God for the land, they were in a famine. Should they leave? Should they stay? They chose to leave, and we had a good discussion around just some of the dynamics of that, and that there isn't an easy answer to some of these things. We talked about several things that they needed to think about, and we need to think about when we look at making decisions based upon a loss of spiritual leadership and just what am I going to do. And we can use this, as we talked last week, whether you're talking nationally, whether you're talking in the situation of a church, a community, Sunday school class, your own family. It's applicable all the way around. And some of the things we looked at that served as questions is that, why should we leave a place where God is named for a place that He's not even acknowledged? This is what they did. They left Judah, Bethlehem, and went to Moab. Why are you leaving where God is named to go to a place where God isn't named? Think about that in making whatever decision. And looking at, what are those in whom we have faith doing? It seemed that Elimelech and his family was the only group that we are made aware of that left and went to Moab out of Bethlehem, at least, of his family, at least. So what are people that you have faith in? What are they doing in that same situation with the loss of spiritual leadership? So why are you doing something different from them? There may be very good reasons, but at the same time, that's some of the things to look at and to think about as we think about balancing, having to make some difficult decisions or figuring out what to do when we're faced with, being on our own to make the decision. And why are we moving? Why are we acting? Is it to run away, or are we trying to regroup in order to fight on in the battle that you're in, whatever battle that may be? And what is the benefit that action is going to bring us? Will it be beneficial to us spiritually? Elimelech needed to have thought about that. So we need to think about that. And where are we inside? What is the motivation? What is it that is driving us when we have situations that we're faced with a loss of spiritual leadership? And that whole thing, you can even take it as you look into the 2016 presidential elections if you want to. Those are some of the very same questions we need to look at and think about as we enter into that, and I know it's 2015, but they're already going to be politicking before it's over with, next short time. But those are questions that we need to ask ourselves as we face a loss of spiritual leadership in our world. How do we relate to that? So this was the basic situation of this family. But they were also a disillusioned family. They left Judah and dwelt in a land that was not a part of God's promise. And after Elimelech's death, his sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married into families that did not share the faith of Elimelech and Naomi, and evidently their sons. And the behavior of Elimelech and Naomi and their family betrayed their names. I think we may have touched on some of this last week, that Elimelech, which, by the way, he is the only person in the Old Testament named this. And his name means, my God is king. And Naomi's name means the pleasant one. And then their sons' physical state failed, and they died. Elimelech died, their sons died, and Naomi was left without 2 sons and her husband. And how many times have we seen this scenario play out in people's lives? Circumstances, none of which really seem to be of their own making, devastated a home. And those who were left just weren't the same anymore. I think we can all think of times, maybe even personal, in which we have been in a place where we have just, because of the circumstances that were going on around us, we were left, spiritually, emotionally, and just mentally drained in our being. And then we act in ways that are not in sync with whom we are as Christians, with who we're supposed to be. So, I think, and this really, as I thought about this passage and looked at this, how they acted, what they were doing, even as we move on down through the passage, the behavior of Naomi. She was disillusioned. Husband's dead, kids are dead. She don't have any grandbabies. I mean, she lives in a foreign land. God's not around. Just the circumstances just simply sucked the life out of her. And I think disillusion, and let's talk about this a little bit, this statement. I think disillusion is the plague of our day for the church. When I say church, I'm talking about in general. How many people do you know that have drifted away from church for no other reason than they have just simply lost their footing in standing on their faith? Just take a moment and think. There was a time that statement was true of me. I'd lost my footing. And as I've said many times, sat in the church and just told God, okay, take your best shot. I really just don't care. Disillusion. How many people do you know that have drifted either away from the church, in their spiritual life, whatever it might be, for no other reason than they've simply lost their footing and they're standing on their faith? What do you think about that? Disillusion.
I think it'd be easier to pick the ones who haven't gone through it.
Yeah.
I think that would be one.
Most likely, yeah. Unfortunately, most likely. The minority are those who haven't lost their footing. As I've said of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when Nebuchadnezzar threw them in the fire, and the scripture says they came out not even the smell of smoke. There have been some things I've been through. I came out just stinking, period, It wasn't just, I had the smell of smoke and charcoal and everything else on me by the time I got through it all. And, we get just simply disillusioned with that. Other thoughts about that?
I think people feel like they have lost faith and there are answers to their problems there, so therefore they don't participate. They don't, they have been, their faith's been damaged.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is through the secular world, because we're demonized and criticized and made to look like idiots, and through the media and whatnot. And of course that's not true for years back, but I think that's a major cause now.
Yeah, and all of that feeds in together, because it's easy as a Christian, as we face the world in all of its complexities, and it doesn't seem like there is anybody who really cares about Christianity, genuine Christianity. There are times that you just want to say, Lord, can't you just do something that just lets us know and lets all these other folks know that you really are on the throne? You just wish God would, maybe a good bolt of lightning somewhere, maybe, something. And we feel this. There's times that I've had, even in my own spiritual life, not in the too distant past, fairly recently, as a matter of fact, just, thinking, it'd be great if you could just do something that would just shore up and help us be confirmed in our faith. Now, we've got it. We've got it right here.
I think he does. I think things happen.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, if you ever kind of noticed it more, things happen. And like even this week, things have happened. And for example, we've had some really bad things happen in our community. And I did notice, like 40 kids posted something, and every one of them said, we are praying for you. Of those 40, I bet 20 of them have not been to church since probably Christmas at least. And while I think that's wonderful, I think that until something bad happens. In East Lincoln, this child had something tragic happen, and I bet you there were the crowded at his funeral yesterday, and I think that's wonderful. But I'll also bet you that 3/4 of those people won't step foot in the church. So when there is something bad, it's okay, especially here, to do it. But then it's like, unless something bad or there's a crisis, when everything's okay, we all go back to being awful or do what we want until we need God.
Yeah.
And luckily where we live, it's okay to go back to God, and God is, we were talking, we can probably even paint a Bible verse on our spirit rocket when we're free. But so we're very blessed to live where we live. But we only all need God when something bad happens.
Yeah. Yeah, after 9/11, the church was filled for a couple of weeks, And because most people want a fire escape. They don't want a path, they want a fire escape. And that's when those things happen. But it's that disillusion that people do experience from all the areas that come around, that after the big crisis is over, we tend to just drift away. We don't see the church, we don't see a relationship with God as being something that is standing, is continuing. And a lot of it's because we've been disillusioned because of problems in the church, or because we hear about this person on television or that person, whatever it might be. Some moron claims to be a Christian and has done just horrible things, but, they focus on that person rather than people who truly are seeking to try to live for God, and
Billy,
get disillusioned.
But, you hit it on the head with 9/11. One of the things that I remember vividly about that time, other than everything else goes on, the politicians, they all came together and looked to God for that, just long enough to give us hope, that maybe
That this might be a providential revival created. Yeah.
and go back there saying,
Yeah, and we've always been like that, but it's still a shame because we have always been like that. And
Sorry, excuse us.
no, are you
It's probably her grandmother.
okay? Anything in particular that we need to do for you?
Just pray for her, please.
My bed.
You're who?
My bed.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
So let us know, okay?
thank you. Sorry.
No, nothing to apologize for. So let's do that. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, when we think about the things that make us disillusioned, to feel that there is nobody around and that nobody cares when we go through a problem is one of the things that create that disillusion in our lives. May Amanda and her family not feel that from this class. We lift them up now. You know exactly what's going on. You see the emotional turmoil that Amanda's in. And you know the nature of all things. Father, we just ask that you would be with them, that you would work out your will, that you would bring glory to your name, and bring comfort and strength to Amanda's heart and mind. May through whatever this is, she feel the love and the concern of her brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ that are a part of this class. Be with them and strengthen them. And we'll thank you for it. In Jesus' name. Amen. Hopefully it's not a tragedy. Obviously something has happened. But just like that, and not trying to hide or anything like that, what we've seen, but when things happen in people's lives, to feel like you are alone, feel like nobody really understands, nobody really cares, nobody, I know when Teresa went through her first bout with cancer, there were people who wouldn't say anything to her about it, as if, to try to deny it is a way of helping her. No, you only make a person feel more isolated that way. And other situations, other diseases, accidents, things that have happened in people's lives, to ignore it as if simply because I don't know what to say does not help that person. And it tends to make them feel disillusioned. Well, I've been going to that class for 2 years, and I had this to happen, and we ain't got a card, nobody's called, nobody says anything when they see us in church. You see how that, and we've got so much stuff going on, it's easy for us to do that. But the person who is experiencing it, Naomi, and we're going to look more at Naomi. Naomi was a wounded believer, and she shows evidence of that in this chapter. But disillusion is something that faced this family. She was facing circumstances that were really not that we can be sure of anyway, due to their failure. And there was a famine in the land, verse 1 told us that. And Moses had warned that this would be a consequence of national failure. Leviticus chapter 26, verses 18 through 20. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 23 and 24. It had been plainly laid out that as a nation, you forsake me, this is one of the things you can expect that I'm going to do. So it will try to bring you back and wake you up, to me. And this famine was probably a resulting judgment of the spiritual, loss of spiritual leadership that the judges showed. However, this family's situation, there's no evidence that this famine was caused by their personal failure. They were not a judge. They were not leaders as far as we know. They were just a regular, ordinary Joe family from a nowhere town called Bethlehem. But they were caught up in the situation and had to endure the famine just like the people who had caused it were having to endure. And there's no guarantee in Scripture to us that simply because you are a believer, you will be spared broad judgments or having to deal with the inequalities of life. How many times have you heard the phrase, well, if you live right, God will bless you? Well, yeah, but not necessarily.
Well, it depends on
Depend
your
on-
definition of blessing.
Yeah, depends on the definition of blessing. Yeah.
I'm feeling that Experiencing God series, that was the one of those eye-openers, and that failure sometimes comes out of obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, wait a minute, no, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to, then all should be well. But if you look at the old prophets, no, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Even being obedient to the outside world, it may look like we're failing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a real eye-opener for me, because that's, of course, not what we tell people. Life is wonderful.
You can become a Christian. Everything can be great after you become a Christian. Well, not necessarily.
But especially if you're obedient.
Yeah.
But no, even as we're obedient, that doesn't mean life will be happy and good.
Yeah.
But that obedience may lead us into places we really didn't want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Jeremiah the prophet is a perfect example of just that thing, obeying God and And due mercy, the man didn't do anything but suffer from there on out because of obeying God.
And I don't really like that.
Yeah, it doesn't, it doesn't,
You know,
it doesn't, it's a hard witnessing tool. Hey, I became a Christian and I lost my job and I've had all this to happen.
don't you want to join me?
Don't you want to be a Christian?
Disillusionment.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
but it goes back to that definition of what a blessing is. It goes back to what is it to be a Christian? What is it all about? When Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this earth, he meant it.
We said he would not desert us.
Yeah.
Footprints in the sand deal.
Yeah, and he never does. It's just like footprints in the sand. It's kind of hard to see, where God is when we go through those times. And we all have them. And I think this is one of the wonderful things about Ruth. It's just a plain picture of what all of us face in some form at some time during our lives. And it gives to us, one, just simply the encouragement, no, you're not alone. You've been through it. She's been through it. Other folks have been through it. But also some of the responses and some of the ways that God worked in and through this little book. We're going to see those are encouragement to us to know that, what about that one set of footprints? That's when I was carrying you. Oh, well, I didn't realize that. Well, no, we don't.
What about when he says he's going to, well, it's several comments in the Bible about he will remove his protection from you if you don't abide. How does that work with all this? I mean, the people that are doing right, if they're not doing anything, their problem is not due to their own failure.
Mm-hmm.
But their protection has been removed, so that
Job, perfect example. Devil came to him and said, let me get my hands on Job. And he had to ask permission to do it, because he couldn't otherwise. God said, go ahead. Took his family, took his crops, took his flocks. I mean, he was a wealthy man. He ended up needing to be on welfare, if you understand. Put it in our own terminology. And then the devil came back to him, and the Lord said, see, you moved me to work against him. Now, that's a paraphrase, but it's there in chapter 2. And he still serves me. And the devil said, let me get my hands on him physically. And the Lord said, go ahead. Just don't kill him. And he did everything but kill him. And through no fault of his own. Didn't do a thing. Even though all of his friends said, Job, you sinned. Job said, what did I do? Yeah, I'm a human being, but what did I do to deserve this? God was proving a point to the devil and proving a point to all of us. That, there are some times that he'll remove protection. One, if we do fail. If we, you climb up to the top of this church and say, Lord, I'm going to jump off. I'm expecting you to protect me. You better have a mattress or something down there because you're fixing to hit the ground. So he will remove that protection if we want to be stupid. You can't fix it, remember? You can break it up, but you can't fix it.
Keeps you with the job.
Sir?
Keeps me with the job.
Keeps you with the job. You see, there's a providential, thing.
Well, isn't that true
But-
with everything that we do that it seems like it's a failure for us? We don't know who we're affecting by the way we react to it.
Mhm.
We could destroy somebody's faith by not putting our faith in God.
And we're going to see Naomi's effort at doing that. Naomi exercised a lot of effort at destroying the possibility of faith in Ruth. You remember those verses where she did that? We often don't think about that. It's right there in chapter 1. We're going to look at it. We're going to see it. Verse 7 through 22. We're going to see it. She made a concerted effort to destroy the possibility of faith in Ruth. She succeeded in Orpah. So, you know, there's no guarantee that we won't go through difficult countries. And now I'm looking at my notes saying countries. Difficult circumstances. Think about this. This family, Elimelech, Naomi, his two boys, are going to go from a godly country, Judah, Bethlehem, to a heathen, openly idolatry-ridden land in Moab. But they didn't have a famine in Moab. The famine was in God's country. That's why they went there. Ain't no famine in Moab. Those people don't live for God. And they got food over yonder.
You know what happened with Egypt? When they went to Egypt, wasn't there a famine?
Yeah,
And Egypt was as far away from
Yeah.
God as a country could be.
yeah. And Jacob told his boys, go down there and get food. Buy it, bring it back.
You know, I think that's a source of disillusionment, Chuck, going back to before.
No, I mean,
you
because that's a big deal.
when
It
you
really,
are that person's living for God, doing the best you can, and you look over here at Moab, who,
yeah.
could care
Yeah.
less.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're prospering,
Mhm.
it seems like everything's rosy and cheery and.
Yeah. And there's many places, even in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man was a rich man. He had all of the earthly stuff. Lazarus, dogs licked his wounds. That's the best he had in life. And we have to see, but once again, when Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this earth, like physical. There isn't an earthly, physical kingdom of heaven. It's a spiritual kingdom. And by that, it also means that as a believer, God may not necessarily remove the leprosy. God may not necessarily remove the cancer. God may not necessarily remove some of the difficulties that you're going to experience. As a matter of fact, you may have more simply because you are now a Christian and people don't like it. But the reward, and this is the, pie in the sky and the sweet by and by. People don't like that phrase, but it's really true. We do receive blessings down here. We do have a lot. But going back to what Paul said in Corinthians, if in this life only we have hope in God, we are of all men most miserable. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And Paul could, he could say that. Shipwrecked, beaten, thrown in jail. I mean, he had all kinds of stuff happen to him. Snake bit, all that, He said, if in this life only, God's kingdom is not made up of a physical glory here. Not yet, anyway. It's coming, but it's not here yet. But that disillusion, we become disillusioned because we have the loss of spiritual leadership. We become disillusioned because we misunderstand what it is to receive blessings from God. We have disillusion because we feel alone. All of these things we've talked about produce that disillusion in our lives. But one of the things that is a message out of Ruth is that it's not all here. If you're dependent on having a great and wonderful life as a Christian, I hate to tell you, but I hope it's true and I hope you have it. But it's not necessarily a guarantee. The guarantee is that He will never leave you nor forsake you. He will be with you, and this book shows that He will providentially work through everything that you've got going on. Elimelech never saw the result of the providence of God working through his move to Moab. He never saw it. He never saw that he was a great, whatever it was, grandfather to David. He never saw that. But he was.
But He puts us through these trials and tribulations to make us grow stronger and more faith in Him. That's the reason all this happens. But, we're spoiled in the United States really compared to a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
We don't go out here and get killed because we say we're Christians now. You know, I know that the school shooting that time, the girl said that she was a Christian, the guy shot her, which has been shown that that didn't happen. You know, there's a book written about it just for the publicity of the book.
Yeah.
I don't know either way. But, you know, we're spoiled here in the United
Yeah,
States. We're
we are.
spoiled because really, you know, we think we got it all this bad, but we really don't. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
we ain't
able
gotta
to
worry
go-
about somebody beheading us next week.
Exactly, or just, you know, a group of Christians and they know that's their Christian and they're meeting here and then they're just gonna come in with machine guns or whatever and just annihilate us, you know, so.
At least not yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you read the book, it tells you, that these things are gonna come. Times are gonna be tougher, it's gonna get rougher.
Yeah.
But that's the reason of the whole point, is that he is trying to tell you, you know, you gotta have faith.
Yeah.
You gotta have trust. You gotta
Exactly.
believe.
Exactly.
And then these things will set you free, basically.
Yeah.
Because that's what he's wanting to see is, you know, we all go through times, but you know what? I think about these kids out here with, Levine Children's Hospital, the cancer centers, the things like that, that we don't even think about. I am so spoiled every day when I wake up and I've got a pain or ache. These kids are going through stuff we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And they go through it every day. And, you know, and that's what picks myself up and says, man, you don't have it that bad, you know. And it bothers me sometimes when people just go on and on and on about their aches and pains and everything. You know what? You're breathing, you're blessed, and you really don't even you're not really even thankful for what you
Yeah.
do have.
Yeah. Yeah, you could very well have something to complain about, really, you know.
Well, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about being crucified as Christians. And we wouldn't be talking about it. But now it's a possibility. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe
Yeah.
not in 6 months or even a year.
But it's coming.
But we can tell it's coming.
Mhm.
The whole country's changed, the whole world's changed.
Yeah.
You can tell it's coming. I go over to eat in Mooresville, and I'm not talking about a specific race, but I see 50, 60 Indians out there getting a picture taken from the Mexican restaurant. I'm like, this is Mooresville, North Carolina.
Mhm.
We got 60 Indians over here that's wearing turbans. I mean, I'm not used to that yet. I'm not used to it.
Yeah. And things are, you know, by 2025, this color will be a minority in America.
Teachers in public
You know.
colleges now are trying to desecrate the flag. They're trying to get rid of the United States of America flag because it offends people. The United States, this is just on the news the other day, and then I seen something about the Bible. They said, well, the Bible is not relevant to this time in our society. So that's the reason they're saying we need to cast that out to the side. But
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that a public college, the teachers in a public college, this was out in California, are wanting to do away with the American flag because they said it offends people from different races and different countries that come to our country for an education. We're paying for it.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
right.
Goes back to loss of spiritual leadership. When you have lost a moral foundation, then you have opened the door to most anything.
What does the Constitution of the United States say about freedom of religion?
Have everybody.
So
You
burn
can
the
have-
flag, burn the Constitution?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can go
You think
there.
there may be a conspiracy involved in
You
it?
open that can just enough, it comes out.
You may not like it, but it's the First Amendment.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, as we think about this family, you know, pulling us all back in, as we think about this family in their basic situation, you know, we're talking just a basic situation. Loss of spiritual leadership, disillusion. They were enduring circumstances that were not due to their own failure personally. May have contributed somehow, but not, you know, the famine in Judah wasn't their fault. And they were facing imminent crisis. Elimelech's two boys, Mahlon and Chilion. One of them's name means sick. Mahlon means sick, and Chilion means frailty or pining.
Why would you name the children?
Yeah.
That's what I'm just
We
saying.
complain about people's names today. How you like that, you know? And evidently, we don't know this, but, you know, going back to the question, why would you name your kid sick and frail, you know? Evidently, they were given these names as they possibly from birth evidenced physical weakness, which in that day was a death warrant. If a child was born with an abnormality, a physical disability, mental disability, a weakness, the family was never expected in the general world, expected to take care of that kid. Take them out in the wilderness, leave them for the wolves, leave them for the lions, throw them off the side of a mountain because they cannot contribute. That was the normal expectation of that world. Not so much for the Jewish nation, but for the world, it was common. You remember that was the great thing about the Spartans in Greece. Whenever a baby was born, the child was looked at and examined by one of their spiritual leaders, and if there was some abnormality, the family did not have an option. Dump him. Or dump her, for that matter. Either one. So evidently, these two boys had a weakness, a physical weakness. And their parents, you know, Elimelech and Naomi lived with the imminent possibility of their death. And I think it's a testimony to Elimelech and Naomi that even though they evidently sick and frail, I mean, hi, sick, how are you doing today? Oh, I don't feel too good. Well, that's why I named you that, you know. That even though they were so sickly, even from birth, that they kept them in the family. They didn't follow what was the expected from the world standpoint again. Why don't you abort that kid? You know he or she's going to be born with Down syndrome. He's going to be born with some kind of disability. Just abort the kid. That's what we would say today.
They do say that.
They do say that.
Right.
They do say that.
Even if they don't know.
Even if they don't know. If you just don't want them, get rid of them, you know. But Elimelech and Naomi kept the two boys that evidently evidenced a weakness that was so great that they named them Sick and Pining. I mean,
Your Indian name is Sick Dog.
yeah, you know, you can just take off all kind of things with that. But this is something else. You know, they faced imminent crisis. Their basic situation. This is what they lived with every day. But one of the great things about these 6 verses is that, you know, and Mahlon and Chilion died. You know, what a shock. Sick and frail and pining, they both dropped off. Yeah, well, I've been expecting it all their life. They've been sick, you know. He never was a strong boy. You know. So, man, they died. Elimelech's dead. But verse 6 is a refreshing little verse. Things are going to clouds are going to come back in verse 7 through verse 22 from Naomi's standpoint. But look at verse 6. New NIV. When she heard, Naomi, when she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. Naomi, even though this was their basic situation, all of this, she still knew where home was. She still knew where home was. After 10 years, they've been in Moab 10 years, and seeing so much that wasn't the life that she thought she was going to have. When she heard of the Lord providing food, she prepared to return home. She just didn't give up and over to the world in Moab. It would have been really easy. You've been living here 10 years. Why go back? They're probably going to have another family. Why don't you just stay here? You've already set up home, you got things going on. Yeah, we got, you know, Naomi and Ruth and Orpah, they've got family. We'll help look after you. You know, you don't have to. No. She prepared to return home. And she just didn't give up. She knew that Israel, in spite of all that was going on, And in spite of being a wounded believer that she was, she still knew that Israel was home and was where she knew she should be. In all of our situations of life, if we can know, still know, and seek to return home in our relationship with God, there's hope. And to think about, what is our attitude in the midst of where you are right now? I don't know what you're going through. Just had a couple that had to leave. Had no idea this was going to happen to them when she walked in here and sat down this morning. Maybe her father's been sick. I don't know. Didn't sound like she was expecting this. But think about, what is your attitude in the midst of where you are right now? Is it that if you hear of God's blessing, you'll want to go and be a part of that blessing? Or is it that, well, I'm in Moab, might as well stay. I ain't got nothing going on nohow, might as well, Yeah, God's doing something, but I don't see a reason to get involved with it. Is that where we are? As individuals? As people within the church? Is that where we are? I don't know. This is not a judgment question. It's something that we have to ask ourselves. With all that's going on, still the presence of God is there. Are you at ease in staying in Moab? Or is it time to try to get back to where you know God is? And I think that's an important question for us in our own spiritual lives. I see these little signs out on the side of the road, and I think they're pretty cool. Pray for revival. I don't know who puts them out, who sponsors them. Don't know. Really don't care. But is it time for us as individuals to really think about, let's get back to Judah. Let's get back to Bethlehem. Let's get back to a deeper relationship with God. There's food there. God is blessing. God is doing something. This is their basic situation. And wrapped up with, she still knew where home was. Now, I've got a couple of minutes. Any questions or anything before we move into our next section?
Did she really have a choice to stay there? I mean, as a woman?
Well, she had as much choice as she had in Israel.
But she would have had family in Israel, wouldn't she?
Yeah. Of course, her daughter's-in-law, you have the in-laws. So,
You know how that goes.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah. What's your name again, boy? Yeah.
That was sort of my question too. Did Amalek have a choice? Or was he led to go? Because if they had not went to Moab, Ruth would never have been involved.
Yeah.
And I know it would have been changed some way if he had not been obedient. But what if he was just being obedient by going?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't say there was a big exodus, it just says he left.
Yeah, which was one of the questions to ask. If everybody else is staying, why are you leaving?
Yeah.
And I think you bring up one point that we'll follow all through this book. God's will, us. Now, ordinarily, we should just follow the path. But most of the time in our lives, it looks like this.
Sometimes you have to go on this side of the board.
Yeah. You have to back up and go around, and maybe it goes around this way, and comes over. And that's kind of where Elimelech was. You wonder, he went to Moab, but if he had not have gone to Moab, how would Ruth ever got into the family? And it's one of those providential questions, and we're going to talk about that. But I introduce it now because we've just got a couple minutes left here. Is that there are times that God will work through wherever we are. And we won't see it at the moment. It's generally after we've got to the point up here. You can look back and say, wow. He's been on board all along. Now, I've been all over the board, but God has been working all the way through. And that's the wonderful thing about providence. God will place you, God will place people in your life, place you in other people's lives, and it's just maybe a momentary contact, but you become a part of the providence that God is using to bring a person from here to here. Paul said it about his ministry. He said, I plant, Apollos watered, God gave the increase. We're just parts of the puzzle. And that's an encouragement. I don't have to put the whole puzzle together, thankfully. God does that. I just have to be willing to be that part. And sometimes God will use me in spite of myself. You know, you can't fix stupid. So he just has to say, grab the back of the neck and say, I need you to do this. You don't want to, but I'm going to work it around so that you still do it. You won't get a blessing for it because you're so hard-headed, but I'm still going to use you. You know, I thought about this in light of this, and hear me carefully, okay? You remember Balaam? And you remember when he took off on his journey to go see Balak? He was riding a donkey, you remember? And the donkey stopped. He beat the donkey. Got going. Donkey stopped again. He beat the donkey again. Donkey finally crammed his leg up against a rock wall, and Balaam was so mad he just wanted to kill the donkey. And you remember the donkey, spoke and said, have I ever done this before? Balaam said, well, no. And it was then that his eyes were opened. He saw the angel waiting to kill him. And I've thought about it, and in light of all of this in providence, sometimes, and this is why I say, hear me carefully, sometimes the dumb ass isn't always four-footed. That's why I said, hear me carefully now. I'm not using the phrase as you normally hear it.
Oh, but I think he's talking about that.
Pretty much.
I'm not even going to comment on it. I'll let your wives comment on that. Yeah, I'm not even going to comment on
We
that.
are condemned now.
Yeah.
Talk to Sherry.
Yeah. But that's the thing about providence. And that's the wonderful thing about it. Even when we are too ignorant to listen to God, if God has a will, He will work in and with and through and around and in spite of us to accomplish His will. And that's a wonderful thing. That is a wonderful thing. And especially if you're a believer, but you're living more here than here, God's still there. And He's going to be working this providence to get you here, to bring you here. He's going to do that. That's the love of the grace of God for that. All right, well, we're going to get into talk about wounded believers next week. Verse 7 through 22.